Welcome, saying good morning to the Americas, good afternoon to Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and good evening to those in Asia and Australia. And welcome to our Wellness Master Class, very special one today with Thierry Malleret. The topic is Wellbeing as a Net Winner in the Post-Pandemic Era. Thierry, thank you for being with us. And I wanted to, in a minute, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy Davis. And Nancy is our Chief Creative Officer for the Global Wellness Summit and Executive Director. She also is the founder of our Wellness Masterclass series. So thank you for that, Nancy. We've had great wisdom shared. And she will officially give you a more official introduction, Thierry, but I always like to start out with something personal. And so I was thinking back, Thierry, to when we met. And I don't know if you remember, but it was at our summit in India, in New Delhi. And I looked it up. It was in 2013. And you actually were our opening speaker. I knew you were a fabulous economist and world famous, and we had you speaking first. And quite frankly, I don't remember everything you said, but I remember one thing that you said in that opening remark that I will never forget. In fact, I remember I was sitting there listening and you said this and I thought, I mean, it literally shocked me. And what you said, if you remember, is that, and this was 2013, in the future, well, for some governments, for some countries, wellness will become mandatory. And I just remember thinking, wow, that was just such different thinking than I think any of us in the audience had thought about at that time. And that was 2013. So Thierry, you got our attention then, and we've become colleagues and friends and ever since. And thankfully you are connected with us through the Wellness Barometer that you write for us, which I consider a little bit of a crystal ball and always look forward to. And we'll let everybody know how they might be able to become part of the people, the inner circle, I would say, that gets to see and hear and listen to your insights every month. And I don't always agree with everything, but I am always intrigued with everything you say, and you have really made a big difference in this whole wellness conversation. So thank you for being with us, Thierry, and over to you, Nancy.
Thank you so much, Susie, and thank you, Thierry, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to make this Zoom instructions very brief, and then we'll get right to Thierry. Beatrice, as many of you know who've been on these calls, she will keep everybody muted throughout this call because of the size of the group and because we want to hear everything Thierry has to say. It's necessary to block out the background noise. You've got two choices of how you can view this call in the top right of your Zoom window. You can choose gallery view, which gives you this beautiful mosaic of global faces, or I would encourage you to use speaker view so that when Thierry is presenting and talking and we're having a conversation, you'll have a much better view of Thierry. Because there's so many people on this call, the right center of your Zoom window is an arrow, a blue arrow, and if you scroll, click that arrow, you can scroll through all of the pages and find your friends and colleagues. We encourage you to use the chat function to post questions, which we will then aggregate and try to get to as many as we can with Thierry. That chat button is center bottom of your Zoom window. Alas, it is dangerously close to the button next to it that is share screen. Someone has already accidentally done that. I urge you to be very careful and not do that, as it's very, very distracting. I do want you to know that this is being recorded and we share it almost immediately on our website. And people do like to go back and listen to things and review and send on to their friends. So we post all of the videos from master classes up on our website, and you'll get a follow-up email about it. Okay, Thierry Malleret. He's the co-founder and principal author of the Monthly Barometer, which is an analytical and predictive newsletter on macro issues for high-level decision makers. That's been Thierry's audience for a long time. He spent his career in finance, from running his own boutique advisory firm to leading the global risk network at the World Economic Forum. We lay claim to Thierry as one of our own. As Susie has mentioned, he has spoken at a number of our global wellness summits. I too remember the moment in India. That was my first summit. He is also the author of the Wellness Barometer, which Susie mentioned, which he writes for us each month for the Global Wellness Institute. And that takes a look at socioeconomic issues in the world through a wellness lens, and it's proven extremely valuable to our constituents. But what brings Thierry to us today really is a new book that he wrote, which he co-authored with Klaus Schwab, who's the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. And it's entitled COVID-19, The Great Reset. And we're hearing a lot, Susie's holding it up as she does, on Thierry, you should know, many calls. I keep telling her she needs a commission. We're hearing a lot about resetting these days, and Thierry's is a unique and very global perspective. This book is really a guide for anyone who wants to understand how COVID disrupted our social and economic systems and what changes will be needed to create a more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable world. It's an extraordinary work, and while often dire, is also hopeful. We're so honored to have Thierry here to tell us about this analysis of the impact of COVID and what he believes will result from this disruptive reset. And I think, ultimately, you'll be encouraged to hear what he has to say. Thierry?
Thank you so much, Nancy and Susie, for your kind words, and I'm truly honored to be with you all today. Thank you very much. Well, I guess I'm going to speak for just a few minutes and then we'll engage into a conversation, right, Nancy?
That's right.
So 10 minutes maybe, 10, 15 minutes, no more?
Anything you want.
Okay, 10 minutes then. Well, in this book, which Susie very kindly shared on the screen, Klaus and I make various predictions regarding what the post-pandemic era will look like. And one of the predictions we make is that well-being will be a net winner of COVID-19. For someone like me, it's totally obvious to say such a thing. It's less obvious when you look at the history of the World Economic Forum. So let me just share with you in a few words why we believe it's going to be the case. There are three main reasons. First of all, with the pandemic, we've all been made aware of the fact that we live in an unwell world. Levels of anxiety, of fear about the future, about unemployment, about tomorrow, about COVID, have heightened our sense of unwellness. And therefore, well-being automatically has scarcity value. When there is less of it around the world, the value automatically increases from an economic point of view. It's something which is very mechanical. Hence, we're paying more attention in an unwell world about the value of being well. Therefore, well-being matters more in such a world than it would be the case otherwise. The second argument is the increasing attention that policymakers are paying to well-being around the world. It's a global phenomenon. Susie mentioned that in 1213 in New Delhi, I made this prediction that wellness will become compulsory because it's one of the very simple, obvious measures that can alleviate the fiscal problems that all countries around the world face by decreasing the cost of health. It's a very simple recipe. And there is increasing evidence around the world that this is going to be ever more the case. And interestingly, it is in the countries led by women, mainly and mostly, that well-being policies are being pursued. Of course, the example of New Zealand comes to everybody's mind. It's the country that is most advanced in the world, the only one that has a budget directly linked to well-being indicators. But it's also something that is gaining tremendous value around the world. And yesterday, I was really amazed to see in the New York Times an article, an op-ed, published by a conservative thinker in the US, who says that we should abandon the fetishism of GDP growth and focus more on well-being indicators as an element of societal and economic welfare. So it's all encouraging. Countries are paying more attention to it, and it's also supporting this idea that well-being will win in tomorrow's world. The third reason is derives directly from what happened with what's happening, because we're still in the midst of it, with COVID-19. When we face an existential crisis, which is being the case with COVID-19, people die from it, become ill, suffer from side effects or after effects after having had the disease. This favors introspection. We start paying attention more to what is essential to us. And what struck us while writing the book, which was during the lockdown in Europe, so March, April, May, early June, we finished it in June, is that when you do a Google search or media search or whatever, you realize that well-being is becoming much more important. It appears more often in the, on social media, in op-eds, in the printed media, on TV, etc. So it looks like there is a growing realization among the global population, but particularly in the US and Europe, that well-being is something which is very, very important to us in terms of our well-being. And I'm going to get back to that in a second. Very briefly, I would like to just develop a very simple framework that supports this idea of well-being becoming a net winner in the post-pandemic era. I don't know, Nancy, I don't know whether, do you have it? Can we share it on the screen?
Yep, Beatrice is going to share it right now.
Okay, wonderful. So this is extracted from the Global Risk Report that is being published every year by the World Economic Forum. I founded it in 2002. So every year there is a Global Risk Report being published on the eve of the Davos meeting. And if you look at the chart, it helps you think in very simple terms. It's a very simple but useful framework to think about the world. So you have different dots, different colors, representing economics, geopolitics, societal issues, the environment, and tech. So 5 macro issues that help us make sense of what's happening around the world. So let me very briefly comment on each of these and maybe help explain how they relate to well-being. So economic, we are at the moment in a very, very sharp shock, economic shock. Increase in unemployment, a shock to GDP, which has gone down 15, 20, sometimes 30% during Q2 in the world. And as a result of all this, we'll be collectively poorer when we emerge from the pandemic, all of us. So we have to think about the implications that this has for the wellness industry. Some sectors will benefit and others will be suffering from the economic effects of the pandemic. It's important to, when you think about the effect that the economic downturn, which is going to last for years and years and years, I think we're not yet aware of the severity of the shock. When you talk to economists, the first comparison that comes to mind is the crisis of 1929, or what happened during the World Wars, World War I and World War II, even though it's different because during the wars you have a destruction of capital, physical capital. So when you rebuild, there is a lot of GDP growth happening, which is not the case with the pandemic. COVID destroys human capital, but preserves physical capital. So it's a very different crisis. But it's a crisis whose effect is going to be very painful for a very long time. There is absolutely no doubt about that. So it makes you realize when you try to think about the consequences of the economic downturn for the wellness industry that wellness is not an asset class. You cannot think of wellness as an industry per se. It's not like food and beverage or travel and tourism or oil and gas or mining. It's totally, or pharma. It's very, very different. It's an amalgamation of different subsectors which bear no comparison with each other often. So this economic crisis makes you realize that some segments will suffer very much. Travel, wellness, tourism comes to mind. it may well be, and that's my conviction, after having written the book and after having spoken with so many leaders from the industry, that we'll never return to normal. You know, we talk about a return to normal, but maybe there will never be a return to normal. And we can discuss it during the Q&A. And by contrast, tech wellness is going to shoot because it's being supported by what's happening in the midst of the pandemic, which has been incredibly beneficial to everything that is tech and digital. So it's important to keep that into consideration, because the effect of the pandemic on the wellness industry are going to diverge dramatically. Some will benefit and some aspect of the industry will suffer. A few words about now the geopolitics. So geopolitics is in blue in this chart, and again you realize that everything is interconnected. You know, if this chart is all about systemic connectivity, you cannot dissociate economic issues from geopolitical or environmental issues. They're all the same. They conflate with each other. They amplify each other. So geopolitics, our conviction is that, which is based again on many, many interviews, is that we're entering a very, very dangerous world. When you talk to policymakers, when you talk to academics from all over the world, you realize that we are in the midst of a geopolitical crisis that is bound to increase dramatically. Of course, first and foremost, what comes to mind is the rising antagonism between China and the US. And immediately you realize that the very rosy projections regarding the increase in outbound Chinese travel will come to a sudden end, particularly in the US and vice versa. Chinese traveling to the US and Americans traveling to China, and it's probably going to impact the entire world. At the moment, in every region of the world, you have problems. You have big problems between Turkey and Greece, which are affecting the Eastern Mediterranean part of the continent. You have big problems in the Baltics. You have, yesterday there were exchange of fire in the Himalayas between China and India, the first time in decades, and so on and so on and so forth. So this will have a fundamental impact on the wellness industry, particularly on wellness travel, of course. And it seems to me that staycation, taking vacations at home or on our own continent, will probably become the norm because of this dramatic geopolitical uncertainty that is increasing.
Hey.
Yeah. Sorry.
That was somebody erroneously unmuting. Please, everybody stay muted and don't share your screen. Thanks.
Now, societal issues in red. So you can see that social instability last year, because this goes back to 2019, was considered as a major risk. And of course, it is now happening. We can see that in many countries around the world, social instability is becoming a very, very acute global risk. In the US, of course, in Europe, in many countries and regions around the world. It is caused by two things. First of all, the increase in unemployment. On several occasions in past issues of the Wellness Barometer, I referred to research in economics that shows how highly well-being or unwellness is correlated with the rise in unemployment. Unemployment, being unemployed destroys your well-being, no matter what happens otherwise. I mean, being unemployed is catastrophic for our personal, individual well-being. And then there is the issues of inequalities, which has been laid bare by the pandemic. The pandemic has amplified the issues, the pre-existing issues of inequalities that existed prior to COVID-19, and I think many of you are in the US, and in the US there are so many studies showing that you are much more likely to catch COVID and to die from it if you are, if you are Black American or if you are Hispanic, and etc. So inequality is increasing, and as a result, the issue of financial wellness, which is not studied very much, but financial wellness is going to become a very, very key consideration. And also, when we think about the social contract that binds societies together, we'll come to the realization that equal societies, or societies that are less unequal than others, also tend to be happier than others. So happiness is equals to subjective well-being in the jargon of economics. And the more equal you are as a country, as a society, the higher the level of subjective well-being. Again, something which has been demonstrated by many different academic studies. Let me now move very quickly to the environment. The environment is in green, and our absolute conviction in the book is that the environment is going to benefit from COVID-19 for different reasons. Some have to do specifically with the pandemic. The pandemic is a zoonotic disease, so it comes from animal, transferred from animals to humans. And zoonotic diseases expand with deforestation. The more deforestation takes place, the greater the amount of zoonotic diseases around the world. So immediately people started to pay attention to biodiversity, the need to preserve our forests, to preserve nature, because it is associated with pandemics. And the more deforestation there is, the greater the likelihood that we face other pandemics going forward. The second important element linked to COVID that has gained tremendous relevance is the quality of air, the air pollution. Again, ample studies, dozens and dozens and dozens since the pandemic started, showing that there is a very high correlation between the air we breathe and the likelihood that we'll catch COVID and we'll also die from it. The reason why there is such a strong rate of infection in the north of Italy, in Lombardy, northern Italy, is precisely because it's one of the most polluted regions in Europe. So everybody's aware of that. And in the book, we are convinced that as the level of awareness regarding biodiversity, the importance of nature, the importance of keeping nature intact, the importance of breathing good air become obvious to everybody, there'll be a wave of activism worldwide that will constrain companies in how they do business. So considerations of reaching net zero as rapidly as possible will become paramount. In the last barometer, I refer to something which didn't even, the word didn't even exist a few years ago, which is regenerative travel. We talked about sustainable travel, but sustainable travel is not enough anymore. People are talking about regenerative travel. So all these conversations about building back better after the pandemic have to do with making the world and nature a better place. And therefore we'll be paying much more attention to that. And if the wellness industry wants to thrive, it has to embrace these very important considerations, because if it doesn't do it by itself, it will be forced upon the industry by regulators, first of all, and also by youth and investors' activism. It's my very firm conviction. Very rapidly, tech. Well, tech has been discussed so many times at the Global Wellness Summit. Tech is great in many respects. There's so many apps related to physical activity, mental health that are great and that are expanding at a very fast pace. We are also, very much aware in the wellness industry and in terms of well-being that another consumption of social media and tech in general can be detrimental to our mental health. So it remains to be seen which impact COVID will have on tech developments. One worrying development, in my own personal view, is the extent to which the surveillance economy is getting around. Many countries around the world, everywhere, on all continents, have taken advantage of the technological measures used to contain the pandemic, tracing, testing, using your app, etc., to implement surveillance measures on the citizens. So it is a concern. Well, I think I'm going to stop here because it's already, well, 3 minutes to the hour, and then we can have a conversation.
Thierry, thank you so much. That's incredible information. I see lots of people taking notes. We are going to be sharing this so people can revisit it. So a few things and a couple of questions that have come from the chat. You mentioned that when we emerge after the shock of COVID and the economic crisis it has unleashed, that certain wellness sectors will benefit. And I think we're all very interested in your perspective on what those are and why.
Okay. Well, I think there is no doubt that the idea of well-being will benefit. We are all aware of that. And I was talking about some very basic research that can be done on Google and with simple algorithm trying to track the way in which some issues expand, others contract. It seems that the two well-being issues that have prospered under the pandemic are walking all over the world, an incredible expansion of walking and an interest in breathing. Well, you had a few webinars devoted to that. And breathing is something, relatively new. I mean, the amount of books published over the past 6 months on breathing is just amazing. I think more over the past 6 months than over the past 50 years on the increasing relevance of breathing well. And so these two activities or practices have benefited enormously from COVID-19, and yet they're unlikely to have an impact on the industry itself because you can walk for free and you breathe for free. In order to learn how to do it well, you can read a book, you can look at an app or at a video, but it's something which is very hard to market. It's not marketable. There are only few apps and companies that can be set up around the beauty of going on a hike or breathing properly. So I want to illustrate this disconnect between the idea of well-being, which is gaining so much traction, and the impact it might have on the industry, which may be minimal, even though everybody now talks about well-being. While researching the book, I was given an opportunity to talk to some global CEOs in the aviation industry, in the travel and tourism industry, and it is my conviction, maybe some people will disagree with me, that it will never return to normal. There are some institutions that are very keen to see the situation go back to normal as it was before COVID, and I don't think it will. It's going to be a new normal. When COVID is behind us, so hopefully at the end of next year, 2021, maybe early 2022, I very much doubt that we're going to travel as much as we did in the past, and I very much doubt that we're going to consume as we did in the past. First of all, we'll all be, collectively financially constrained. Many people will be poorer, many people will have lost their job, many people will have had a pay cut, 10, 20, 30%. Traveling and enjoying tourism is an essential good from an economic standpoint, so I think it's going to impact the industry. But most importantly, when we are in the post-COVID era, all these issues about the environment, which are much more serious than COVID-19. I mean, the environmental problems that we face are considerably more serious than COVID. COVID is short-term. It's bad, but it's manageable. The climate, not only climate change and global warming, but all the issues associated with biodiversity, deforestation. I mean, the fact that nature has to be regarded as an asset, as an asset class. By the way, yesterday there was an interesting article by Hank Paulson, the former Treasury Secretary of the US, saying nature should be considered as an asset class, as any other asset class, and it is. So when you destroy it, you have to pay for it. And I think this will become something very well understood by everybody. So in the post-pandemic era, these environmental problems will become more important, more visible, more concerning. And I think that activism and public pressure will prevent us from traveling as much as we did in the past. And this is corroborated also by interviews that I conducted with several very large companies around the world. I asked them, so what will you do in the future? Will you travel as much as you did in the past? So I went to companies that employ private companies, American, European, Chinese, etc. And they said, well, our policy now is that when you travel for the purpose of meeting a client, you'll be able to travel. If it's to meet a colleague, you will do it by Zoom. So immediately you can travel by 50%. Business travel, and business travel subsidizes at the moment holiday travel. The reason why we can travel to Bali or to Patagonia so cheaply is because it's being subsidized by business travel. So all these factors mean that travel will become more expensive, we'll travel less, there'll be much more pressure, public pressure and personal pressure to travel less, to go on vacation next door, to engage in maybe simple activities. And therefore there is going to be a period of adjustment which may last for a few years.
Thierry, in other conversations and Zoom meetings that we've held, we've been talking about certain sectors of the wellness industry, and I would argue that it is an industry, that are sort of really booming because of the focus, the kind of focus you've been talking about, outdoor, nature, air quality, those things. And that one of them is wellness communities and real estate. Those people want to live and work in places that have their well-being, at the center of the actual physical space. Can you talk at all about that area, the living and working spaces, and how those have become very critically important in a different way?
Oh, totally. And I think I'm well placed to do it, from a pure anecdotal point of view, because I'm in Chamonix. Chamonix is is one of the most prominent mountain resorts in Europe. Until this summer, 60% of revenues of the valley of Chamonix came from US travelers. So it came down to zero this summer. So I could see how people are trying to readjust and what's happening in the community of Chamonix. So Chamonix is the epicenter of well-being in many respects, because that's a mecca for mountain activities, alpinism, ski, mountain biking, hiking, etc. What strikes me, and again, it's an example of what you just said, it has to be analyzed in a very, very fragmented manner. So in Chamonix, and maybe it's not universal, but all the five-star hotels are suffering very much, because five-star hotels used to be occupied by American and Chinese tourists. So none of them came over the summer. However, 3 4-star hotels decided to embed the local community with travelers from Europe and create, well-being spaces. So all these hotels have been full throughout the summer. They created a range of well-being activities. You go to the hotel for a drink, and then you have a yoga course. You create social connections, which is such a fundamental aspect of societal well-being. So you go and have a drink and meet your friends and talk to someone you have not met for months or years. You reconnect. You can read a book. So they become very much living places. And they embed what this quintessential idea of well-being is all about. Reconnecting with people, having a good time, eating well. You eat local products. It's not fancy, and you have all sorts of different well-being activities. Another example, in Chamonix, they didn't exist a year ago. Now you have 5 Shirin-yoku companies that have been busy like hell during the summer. They couldn't cope with the demand. So many things, exactly, Nancy. And I think it's hard to infer from these very specific examples a global picture because every country is different. But I can see that in Europe at least, and I think also in the US, we are going very firmly into this direction. So well-being.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And there are countries that are incentivizing travel, local travel. I know Japan is doing that. I think Hungary is doing that. There are countries that are wanting people to stay in their hotel, stay in the local hotels, use the local facilities, access those because they're trying to support the economies, their local economies. And so the idea of having a vacation where you can, drive or walk or bicycle to is I think it's a huge opportunity for the hospitality industry. It's a real reset for the hospitality industry. And I think you mentioned to me when we spoke that you've talked to a lot of the hospitality brands too, a lot of the big hospitality brands. And how are they viewing their reset at this time?
Well, if you talk to the very large brands, Hyatt, Accor Group, etc., I think they're having a very tough time because they will have to close so many hotels. The small family businesses, the smaller structures are coping more easily, in my opinion, because they're much more agile. When you're small and when you are family owned, it's much easier to make fast decisions and to adjust. So for the first time, I can see a very important dichotomy arising between family-owned businesses and large public companies. So yes, the small are capable of rebounding faster, even though they have less capital to deploy, of course, because they're smaller. And it's more difficult for them to negotiate with the banks, but they can adjust, they are more agile. For the large companies, I think it's very, very difficult. I can give names, but the companies like Club Méditerranée, Hyatt, etc., all these which are operating globally, you have a conflation of geopolitical, societal, economic difficulties that make it very, very hard to operate a business in a sustainable manner at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a vote for small and agile kinds of companies because they can really pivot and turn and change something about the way they do. How do we as an industry sort of seize this moment? Because the world is turning to wellness. I mean, in many ways, on many levels, all over the world. We see it as a global organization. Lots of people coming to us. You see it. I know a lot of the people on this call do. How do we seize this and really have impact in the government? I mean, how do we do something that's going to have a lasting impact where it matters, moving the needle on this?
Well, I think something which is truly important is to have, I don't know whether you can call it a manifesto, but a collective declaration showing that the industry is walking the talk. I look at all industries and it surprises me that often in terms of embracing sustainability, the oil and gas industry is ahead of the curve. When you look at what's happening with Shell, with BP, commitment to net zero in 2030, 2025 in some cases, it's happening very, very, very fast. And I think that if the industry doesn't embrace these trends collectively, at least demonstrating a collective willingness to do so, and in a resolute manner, it's going to be very hard. And I'm always struck, I know how difficult it is to run a hotel, to run a spa, and these are very labor-intensive businesses. But for example, I was trying to compare the 4-week, 4 weekdays instead of 5. Everybody knows that it favors productivity, it increases well-being, it decreases absenteeism, etc. But again, it's hard to compare because there isn't a wellness industry per se. But for example, when you compare the performance of the hospitality industry with others, it's bad. the insurance industry is ahead of the curve, the banking industry is behind, and when you look at hotels, etc., it's not great. So why is it that the industry, which is benefiting from such traction at the moment, so much wind in its sails, is not demonstrating a strong commitment to the values that are becoming universal? Work a bit less, be more respectful of minorities, be exceedingly aware of the necessity to become truly sustainable, of embracing net zero, etc. So I think it's important to make such a commitment from an industry point of view, just for the reputation of the businesses that are part of it.
Thierry, you have in your own world and your own work always included well-being and nature as part of the way you work. You have meetings while hiking and walking, and you've been able to do this for a long time. With the issues of physical distance and connectivity, how would you continue a kind of closeness with your clientele? I mean, how on a sort of bigger scale, when you look at that, how do people stay connected while they have to be distanced? And what about the impact on mental health and mental wellness that is also a kind of parallel pandemic here?
Well, as you said at the beginning, we have our summit taking place on Friday. And one of our contributors is Lord Richard Layard, who founded the discipline of wellbeing economics, and he just wrote a book on mental health. And physical activity, and walking in particular, is a great antidote to mental unwellness. And it's, you can't walk everywhere, of course, and it's much easier to do in the mountains or on the beach or in the countryside. But walking, it's a fabulous activity. It's very, very simple, and you can go on a walk outside. You are 20 times less likely to catch COVID when you're outside than inside, and chat with the people you are working with. That's a great way to reconnect. In Chamonix, you go to any bar in the evening, you see many people connecting, while keeping physical distancing measures, which are a meter per person in France. It's sometimes more, sometimes a bit less, depending on which country you're in. But if you want to connect, you can still connect, despite the measures that are being put into place to contain the pandemic. And when this is over, I think everybody will have realized how important it is to take time in nature. We need it. It's a fundamental precondition in terms of our own personal well-being. And
we know that
we'll also have someone coming to Chamonix, and I hope you'll invite him to the Global Wellness Summit next year, called Andres Roberts. He has a project called the Biodiversity, and he invites global leaders to retreat on their own on an island in Wales for 2 days. And it has a measurable effect on how they make sensible decisions afterwards. You make better decisions when you, so they don't connect socially, they're on their own, but retreating into nature is something that everybody can do, more or less, and which is very beneficial to our own sense of well-being.
That sounds wonderful. I know there are lots of people on this call who would agree, and feel free to connect anybody you think should speak at the summit, for sure. Just following the mental health question one more time, because everybody is really very, very concerned about it. It's obviously impacted the global workforce, dramatically. And you've been talking to lots of CEOs of lots of companies. Are any companies doing a good job? Are any companies leading the way when it comes to the mental wellness, mental health of their employees, their constituents? Or have you found any, a model for how this could be done, how we can sort of attack this at a high level?
Yes, of course, having a wellness policy put into place is an important thing, but most importantly, you realize that it's impossible for a company to put into place meaningful wellness measures unless they're not crazy about KPI. Some companies decide that you can have a free meal and a vegetarian meal and you can go outside, you can walk, blah, blah, blah. But if you have crazy KPI, you go nuts and you are likely to experience a burnout. So at the moment, there is so much evidence that having a 4-day week is good for well-being. And it's a measure that so many companies around the world should put into place when it's doable. Of course, it's much easier for service companies than for the manufacturing business. But a 4-day week is a wonderful idea. Many studies in academia showing that having a boss who is empathetic goes a long way in favoring well-being at work. So these are very simple measures, but they're not being implemented across the board. Again, it looks like the companies that do best are those that are located in the Nordic countries, as always, in terms of well-being. The Nordic countries are so much ahead of the curve. Denmark, Norway, Sweden, easy with great equality between genders. If you have babies, you can have someone in your company taking care of your newborn child. You work for 3 days a week, the father can take some time off, etc., etc. So this is well understood and well known and well analyzed in terms of research. So why is it that no more companies do it around the world? I don't know.
Yes, that's a big question. Lots of controversy over some of the way those countries have handled the pandemic as well. But they do usually score high on the at least of the global happiness index. Susie, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, Thierry, would you talk a little bit about the haves and the have-nots, the 90%, the 10%, the luxury arena? We talked about Davos, for example, and it's been criticized because so many high-end CEOs come, and yet what about the rest of the world? And in our arena, wellness for all has been something we talk a lot more about now. We have not done that well in the past, but our roots are often in more of the luxury arena, spas, high-end luxury resorts around the world. And can you talk a little bit about that? Because we're all wanting to be more aware and contributing to wellness for all, yet it's, not, and with the pandemic, I understand, the difference between those who have and those who have not is getting greater. So maybe can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course, with great pleasure. Susie, before I do so, I have to apologize. I said to Nancy yesterday that in 5 minutes, I need to jump on a call with it's a very, very important call. And
I'm watching the time for you.
Thank you so much. So I do apologize to all of you for having to interrupt this conversation in 5 minutes. Well, Susie, you're absolutely right. I work at the World Economic Forum, which is very often presented as an exclusive organization, which it is in many respects. There is the same comment made about the wellness industry. It's predominantly white. It's predominantly occupied by people who are in the top income bracket. And in a world that is becoming so much unequal, it is a problem. It is a problem, and the only way to mitigate the risk that this problem poses is to become more inclusive. So at the WEF, there has been an effort to invite activists, to invite minorities, and so it's something which is happening at the moment. I think the wellness industry, as you just said, Susie, is doing the same thing, the same measures, but it is, it is a problem. How do you create more inclusivity in a world that is becoming so much unequal? And I think the issue of financial wellness should be addressed heads on. It's not so much talked about. Again, there are very few examples of companies that provide courses in terms of financial wellness. What do you do with your cash? How do you think about retirement? how do you manage your income, etc., etc. So, being able to help your employees, your colleagues, your friends in this particular domain, I think is quintessentially important. Because again, if there is no financial wellness, there is no wellness at all. I mean, for the families, who have difficulties trying to make ends meet, the idea of well-being is just alien. It's not even an issue. So embracing, diversity, being more inclusive, I think is an absolute necessity. For me, it's like the net zero commitment to the environment. There are two absolute imperatives. One is towards the environment and the other one towards social inequalities, because it is the gravest problems Western societies face at the moment.
Thank you, Thierry, and thank you, Susie. And I am mindful of the time, Thierry, with 2 minutes left. And I'm going to ask everybody to hang on even when Thierry has to leave, because we're going to tell you more about how you can access what Thierry writes for us, et cetera. But I just want to ask you the question I ask everyone on a masterclass, and you can make these answers very short so you make your call. And that is the first one is what keeps you up at night. And the second is, what are you optimistic about? Because there's got to be something in there you're optimistic about. And that's how we want you to leave the call.
So what keeps me up at night are the global risks that we're facing, particularly the environmental risk, which I think are much more serious than we think. And what makes me optimistic is the ingenuity of human beings. We always are capable of finding new solutions, new ideas, form new connections, and in the end, it has to make you optimistic about the world.
So faith in humanity.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, and my apologies for having to bring it to an end.
Thank you for spending the time with us, Thierry, really.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Nancy. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Thierry.
Bye-bye.
Fantastic.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So while we still have many of you, and Thierry is fantastic. He had to get a call with some minister of somewhere that is going to help us all. We did want to mention to you a little bit about what Thierry does for us. Susie, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So when we met Thierry in New Delhi and he spoke, of course, we were very intrigued about what he does. And what he does, in fact, I think I have a copy of it here. He writes something called the Monthly Barometer. And it looks a little bit like this. It's a one-page, once a month, on the economic happenings around the world. And he has a whole network of people that contribute to it. And for those of you who write, you know that it's actually harder to write less than it is to write more. So the fact that he writes all of this on one page is very, very attractive, especially to people who are very busy, which is, of course, I'm sure all of us. So I signed up for his monthly barometer and I started getting it. And in the beginning, I have to say, all this economic talk was very challenging, but, I have a little business background. And over the months, I became more aware of what this all meant. But what I wanted and I thought would be valuable is for him to then take all of this and put it through a wellness lens. So I asked Thierry, I don't know how many years ago it was, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, Thierry, what about, and he's so interested in wellness and well-being, so that was the reason also he was interested. I said, why don't you, if you would, write for us a wellness barometer? Just take what you've written and then add a little something about what does this mean for wellness and well-being. And he said, yeah, I think I'd like to do that. So that is what he did. And so it's turned into a wellness barometer that he sends us once a month. And I very much look forward to reading it at the moment it comes to my inbox. And then we decided, it would be great to make that available to other people. But because his situation is such that he has a subscription, we couldn't just give it away. And we also do, in all transparency, we pay him for this now because it does take quite a bit of work. So what we decided to do is to share this wellness barometer with anyone that becomes an ambassador of our Global Wellness Institute. And so now, as ambassadors, and we have a lot of them hopefully on this call, they do receive this monthly barometer, wellness barometer from us. And so that is a way to receive the barometer. Becoming an ambassador, Nancy, you can talk a little more about it. You can go to the globalwellnessinstitute.org website, and it tells you about becoming an ambassador. There's a lot of other benefits as well. There is a cost for that. Nevertheless, I think everyone who has become an ambassador usually continues to be an ambassador every year, because as you can see from listening to Thierry, there's a lot of value in his perspective of the future. So that, and we also have him usually coming to the summits, and he meets with all the ambassadors at the summit and talks about what he is seeing for the future. So
we also, you know, we also extract from that barometer for the Global Wellness Brief,
right,
which comes out every 2 weeks out of the Institute. And so you do get a taste of that.
Yeah.
Beth McGroarty, who writes that for us, does pull from the barometer and Thierry's insights. So there are 2 ways really to access, but the full barometer is, you know, a paid subscription because we have to do that, as Susie explained. It is so valuable. If you can imagine getting 12 of those in a year, and the impact that can have on a business is quite extraordinary. So what we'll do is we'll put the link to becoming an ambassador in your follow-up email, which Beatrice will be sending out. And, you know, you can just take a look at it, but, and also a link to sign up for the Global Wellness Brief if you haven't already done so, because that's also information, and Thierry does contribute to that. So those are 2 great things that, and he has spoken at many summits. He is supposed to try to make it to Palm Beach this year to our summit. We'll see if he can. He is an incredible advocate for wellness. He lives it in his work. He does hold his meetings, you know, in the Alps. He's very fortunate to have such a magnificent, you know, backyard. And I know what he was talking about must have resonated so well with so many on the call about nature and breath work and all of the things that are now so really so important. I think economists are always a little bit pessimistic, I have to say. You all know I was struggling to get him to say things optimistic. I think we got there, but I know all of you see the silver linings in a lot of what he was saying and the opportunities, which I think really do abound for the industry. So I will just say thank you all so much for being on the call, and keep coming, keep tuning in. We're going to have a lot of incredibly interesting people coming up all the way up to the summit and beyond. So stay well, and thank you. Susie, you want a final word?
I'll just say thank you. And those of you who might want to unmute and say goodbye, feel free to do that. We've learned that Zoom now does not allow us to unmute everyone all of a sudden. So you have to unmute yourselves, but please welcome, unmute, say goodbye, hello, etc. And thank you for being with us today. And next week we have another masterclass that you will get information about in the email. So thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you everyone so much.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Nancy. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Awesome
Bye,
job.
everyone.
Thank you all. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Hi, Beatrice. Thank
Ciao
you.
pra tutti.
Bye, Misha.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye from Robin Russell.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you and goodbye.